According to Google, the idea of settling Jews in Uganda was proposed by the British government in the early 20th century, specifically in 1903. This proposal came to be known as the Uganda Scheme or the Uganda Plan. It was suggested as a response to the increasing persecution of Jews in Eastern Europe, particularly in Russia. The plan was never fully implemented, and there was significant controversy surrounding it, as many Jews were not enthusiastic about settling in Uganda. They had a deep historical and religious connection to the land of Israel, which is an integral part of Jewish identity. Ultimately, the Uganda Plan was abandoned, and it did not lead to any mass Jewish settlement in Uganda. Instead, the Zionist movement, which aimed to establish a Jewish homeland in the historic land of Israel, gained more prominence, eventually leading to the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948. The Western world and mainstream media seem to be supporting the Israeli apartheid regime, which is often seen as a racist colonial state with a Zionist agenda. They appear to justify their actions as self-defense against what would have been known Uganda terrorists, had they settled in Uganda, similar to how they supported the white supremacist apartheid regime in South Africa against the native black majority. It's essential for Rwanda to be cautious when accepting immigrants transferred by Britain in the name of resettlement, as Britain is seen as responsible for causing turmoil and bloodshed through its historical colonialism, lest in future centuries they might support the very immigrants to occupy Rwanda, because according to what one would call a script is what is taking place in Palestine, Zionists are occupying their line with all impunity supported by Britain and some powerful Western allies. It's disheartening to observe how Western media treats Palestinian officials when they host them on their TV shows. They tend to pressure these officials to take blame for the actions of Hamas and repeatedly interrupt them while emphasizing Israel's actions, particularly the harm caused to mothers and babies. It's as though there's a consistent editorial directive not to acknowledge the suffering of innocent Palestinian people who are not affiliated with Hamas. The media often portrays this conflict as if it only began on October 7, 2023, neglecting the historical context. They tend to focus on Israeli casualties while disregarding the long-standing plight of Palestinians, including land theft and occupation for 75 years, as well as the enduring oppression in the Gaza Strip. In contrast, the same Western media gives extensive coverage to the situation in Ukraine, condemning Russia, with their governments providing arms and financial support. However, they refrain from condemning the actions of Israel and even fail to acknowledge the existence of Palestine. The use of the term Zionism reveals the belief of Jewish Israelis in establishing the State of Israel. This ideology has led to the occupation and desecration of Palestinian lands, which is seen as unjust since you cannot create a state where one already exists, and it's not ethical to occupy the homelands of others. Palestinians have been forcibly displaced, and the only place they have left, Gaza, has been turned into an open-air prison for 17 years by the same apartheid regime. To add insult to injury, the Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant has dehumanized Palestinians by referring to them as human animals, yet they still receive international support. It is frustrating that the Western media hardly mentions Palestine and does little to address their dire situation. Instead, Palestinians as a whole are collectively punished for the actions of Hamas. Without downplaying any casualties from either side, particularly in light of the recent Hamas attack on Saturday, October 7, 2023, it is important to note that there is no justification for such actions. This should not be seen as anti-Semitism. It may not have been a random act of terrorism, but rather a reaction rooted in decades of dehumanizing Palestinians through violence. The Zionist Jewish state dares to harm Palestinian children, using the excuse of them being human shields, while Western mainstream media remains silent and supportive of the oppressor. It seems that they only pay attention when Israelis are affected. The IDF has imposed a complete lockdown, denying essential resources like water, food, and transportation to what Defense Minister Yoav Gallant refers to as a human animals. Surprisingly, neither the perceived to be independent Western media nor the Western superpowers have criticized these actions. Instead, their primary concern seems to be the inability of the oppressor and occupier, whom they've equipped and supported, to detect what occurred on Saturday. It's noteworthy that it's widely known that they have the capability to subject an entire race to such inhumane conditions in addition to carrying out bombings. This should raise serious doubts about the historical actions of colonial Britain and its allies through the Zionist movement, which ignored the suffering of the Palestinians and continued to pursue a policy of apartheid. Any Western country, with the exception of Ireland and partly Italy and others, which has come out to oppose and protest the apartheid Zionist hegemony, should condemn these actions and advocate for peace on both sides, urging the Zionists to respect and implement UN resolutions while ceasing expansion and respecting the Palestinians' right to self-determination. The Western mainstream media should refrain from making excuses for the Zionist state's bombing of innocent Palestinian civilians as a retaliation against Hamas, as this amounts to collective punishment and goes against human rights conventions. It is also important to note that, even with numerous United Nations resolutions, the situation persists or remains unchanged. The assertion that some Zionists claim to be the children of God can be seen as disingenuous or problematic. It's crucial for the international community, particularly the Western world, to move beyond partisan support and actively engage in peace negotiations. Palestinians should not be dehumanized or treated unfairly, and a fair and equitable resolution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict should be sought. The whole mess starts with the British Balfour Declaration, hegemony.